This is the presentation that I created in the 90s about John Curtis, Curtis Electro devices, and Curtis keyers. My name is Brad Mitchell. I'm amateur radio call sign N8YG, and I presented this at Pacificon back in the 90s per Doug Hendricks and others' requests. After I wrote an article about Curtis keyers. I wrote the article about Curtis keyers called The History of Curtis keyers, mainly because I was using Curtis as a research point for Iambic modes A and B for developing those for the tick keyer project that I worked on with embedded research that I was co-owner with Gary Diana, and we developed the tick series of keyers back in the 90s and had a lot of fun doing that. But first, the quiz. I During all this research and stuff, I ran into this set of paddles and I thought I knew what it was, and maybe you do, but I was stumbled or confused by it. So I found out it was a key to go with the Hal keyer. Hal had quite a line of keyers, I guess, back in the day, and that was a set of paddles that went along with it in this ad. So it was called the FYO key. Pretty neat looking. And here's another one that looked familiar to me. I thought, well, I knew what this was. It's a bencher, right? It looks like a bencher to me. So I concluded it was a bencher, and then I found this ad way before bencher existed, I believe, and it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there are a lot of things I didn't really know. And now on with the show. So this is little guy here is called the bug. John Curtis decided that his company needed a mascot, and he was looking for a bug. It's actually a little bumblebee of sorts, and it's kind of a cute little mascot. He really didn't do much with it, but it was what he had chose. So John Curtis himself was born in Bradford, PA in 1930. Graduated from Penn State in 1952. Licensed in 1947 as W3NSJ. Worked at Sperry Gyroscope, his first job out of college. He was in the U.S. Navy as a lieutenant. Worked for Corning Glass and Signetics in marketing. And in 1968, he founded Curtis Electro Devices. That's a picture of John. I'm not sure what year it was or how old he was in that photo, but that's John. The first keyer, the electronic fist, I guess was a nickname. John used this along with some friends to upgrade to extra class. He thought it would be fun to make a keyer so he could get his code speed up, and so he did it and created the EK38 around 1968. And I'm pretty sure this isn't the first one he created, because the first one he created was just a prototype, but it did work good. It just had simple logic, logic gates, nothing, no ASICs or any fancy chips in it. The next one he did was the EK39. He added weight, DOM memory, and that was in August of 1970. EK39M had read-only memory or SCROM. There were both versions that were around. SCROM was scratchable read-only memory. You had to actually scratch your call sign into the chip under a microscope. and then later it became ROM. So it's a quite an interesting thing that he had to scratch. I don't think I've ever heard of Scrom before, but anyway, that was interesting. The EK402 came out, and oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the model numbers for each of these products were basically based on his age. So at the time that this EK402 came out, he was probably 40 years old and 2/10. So that's the model number significance, all based on his age. It was a pretty simple thing, he thought. So he figured out that he would do that for all his products, and he did. So the EK402 was a memory keyer, had 20 character memory. It was programmable. It was very expensive. Can you imagine spending $289.95 back in '71 for that fancy keyer? But that's how much it cost. And a lot of work and components went into those back then. This one was the EK402RC. I think it went along with the EK402 as a remote control. And as you can see, it's added on top of a ham key. I think that's a dual ham key, the one that has the Iambic paddles as well as the straight key. I don't know the date on that particular key, but it was very, very good. Very neat and unique, I think. I don't know how many people bought them or whatever, but I guess if you had everything, that might be one of the things you had. The 404 was a deluxe keyer. I'm not sure exactly why it was deluxe. It was in 1972. And I say it was 1972. That's when I found these ads. So you might note that it's a 404. He was probably 40 years old and 4/10 of a year when this was produced. But the ad I found was 72. He created a station identifier, ID 403. Up to 20 Morse characters were programmable. The speed was adjustable, 3 to 20 minute delay. And it was $200, $199.50. You could have that and automatically ID for a repeater or experimental stations or whatever you wanted. But that was one of the products he created way back when. There was the S100 computer board called, and the system it went in was called the System 4000. It was about the same time that the Altair and the MSI computers were popular. It produced ASCII, RIDI, CW, you name it, all those. Pretty cool looking. EK420 came out with the optional memory. It was still discrete logic, 193 or 139.95, and 1973 is when I found that ad. The KM420, 124-bit, about 100 characters of CW message memory. Optional for extra 1024-bit memory, which so you could double your memory, and that was $300 back in '73. Pretty snazzy looking unit. The KB4200 was the first keyboard that Curtis Electro Devices produced. It was discrete logic still, and that was October of 1974. Of course, now we can do everything with a computer, but it looks like a snazzy setup there. The very first chip that was produced was 8043. It was an application-specific chip, or an ASIC, basically a full custom chip, and it worked first try. It had DIP memory only, It was $7.95 in 50 plus quantities back in 73. So that 8043 was the first one he produced. The first 8043 base keyer was the EK430, and it was 125 bucks, around 75. You can see the price on this seems to have gone down a little bit with the introduction of the ASIC. Then the Instructo keyer, John said these were not real popular, but it was 8043 based, generated some random code, and it was March of 76 as $225. But I guess, you know, if you wanted to learn the code and you wanted to have a keyer ready to go, that was the thing. The 8044 chip was done in parallel with the 8043. It had DOM memory added. It was the first gate array designed for a company called IMI out in California. John knew a consultant that worked for IMI, and IMI was looking for a first trial for their gate array. So John got his 8044 chip in the very first gate array that IMI did, and it was successful. These were $25 each, and 1975 is when that was produced, or at least when the ad was that I saw. They were, the 43 and 44 were done in parallel, so they were produced about the same time, and both of them were full successes. So that's pretty incredible. The 8044M added a speed meter, direct readout to an analog meter. It was mode A, 1980. 1995, $5 more than the 8044. So 8044B stands for what else but mode B, introduced for those people that like this new mode. Apparently it was a mistake by an unnamed manufacturer, but became very accepted. Now John told me in a phone call that I had with him one time that he thought it was from Hal. And he said, don't print that. And I said, okay. Since John's passing, I think it's okay to say that stuff, but that was his, that's what he thought. He thought it was Hal, but I think that the jury's still out whether that was a mistake from a company or not. But anyway, that was what John thought. Mode B was characteristic to Ten-Tech Heath 9 AccuKeyer per Curtis ad, and that was 1981. The 8045 big keyboard chip. Boy, look at that thing. That's a huge chip, but it was the brains of the keyboard. So let's see, EK480 and 480M incorporated speed meter. The 8044 or 8044M, 1978. $135 or $150, depending on which one. The Instructo Memory Mate IM480 had 464 character memories, 180 bucks. Had a stop button, random character generation, and it was about 1978. The KB480, based on that big 8045 chip, requires a EK480 keyer to work. 200 bucks, and that was in 1978. So the keyboard had an 8045 chip in it, but you also needed an EK480 keyer for this arrangement to work. The KB4800 added the 8044 chip and controls integrated in, and was 350 bucks. In 1978, no additional keyer required. Everything was built in. So that was a whole unit right there. The KB4900, Morse ASCII and Baud keyer, 8035 and 8044. I'm not sure if that had that 8045 chip in it, but I suspect it probably did. That was 1979, about 400 bucks. The K5 and K5B were interesting devices, very popular, speed control only. Now, if you look at it, $39.95. That price really came down with those integrated ASIC and gate array chips. So that's where the whole thing was headed. The price of those keys was going down very rapidly. This was the very last keyer for Curtis Electro devices. The little bugger, as it was called, was very popular, except in Europe. Little bugger means something else in Europe, and wasn't flattering. So they wanted, I think that he had to make the cases without the name on it for Europe. So, and then finally, the last, I think this was the last chip that had the 8044 ABM, had both A and B modes. Mode A, of course, was what Curtis did. Meter for speed indication, and a spring of 86 is 20 pins. Yeah, it's the last chip. So John Curtis himself was born in Bradford, PA in 1930. Graduated from Penn State in 1952. Licensed in 1947 as W3NSJ. Worked at Sperry Gyroscope, his first job out of college. He was in the U.S. Navy as a lieutenant. Worked for Corning Glass and Signetics in marketing. And in 1968, he founded Curtis Electro Devices. That's a picture of John. I'm not sure what year it was or how old he was in that photo, but that's John.